Hey, welcome to the Community Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Johnson Lynch, here on Big Condo Radio. Please like and subscribe if you like our content because we like to talk to people in the community to give them an opportunity to kind of like share their stories and to walk in their journeys. And today I'm joined by a gentleman that I've always heard about but never had the opportunity to meet in person, Mr. Tayo Oluko.
Nice to be here, Chase.
Did I get that right this time? Great. Teo, my friend, you are an actor, a singer, and a playwright. And I mean, throughout, being in Liverpool for the past 20 years, I've obviously come across you here and there, but I was pleased to actually sit down with you and have this one to one and everything. Because on the one hand is that I find your story just fascinating, but it's just that like what you're doing, this present project that you're doing, we're going to really go into. I just think is an amazing thing to do in these times. So thank you for coming into our studio.
Thanks for inviting me.
What I was going to say was what I thought was interesting is because we do kind of like the show notes, so we do, getting to know each other and everything. And like when I was telling you about my past coming from Ohio. I didn't even get to mention it's Columbus, Ohio that I'm from.
Oh, right, yes.
And everything. But you were telling me that you were part of that interview with Blackfest with the gentleman that is.
He's on death row in a penitentiary in Youngstown, Ohio.
Right. And I guess it was amazing. It was amazing to hear of his story and his journey. But I just want to just take this opportunity to say to people, please keep watching Blackfest. It's going on all week and everything. Aren't you doing something for Blackfest?
That was it. That was yesterday.
Oh, okay.
And so I was moderating a conversation.
You're the moderator. Got it.
That's right. I was moderating a conversation between three people with prison experience, two who are out, Ashley Nugent and a guy called D. Hunter.
Yeah.
And the death row inmate whose name is Keith Lamar.
Right.
He's been on death row for about 30 years. And he's actually innocent of the charges that put him on death row. And he has an execution date, November 2023. Oh. He has apparently exhausted all his legal options and is basically just trying to tell his story in the hope that, his story is heard, but also that something might happen that will result in him coming off death row.
Yeah.
So, and he wrote a book about it, his story called Condemned, and we talked about that yesterday and basically just wanted people to know the story, share it, and do what you can. So Keith Lamar.
And because this was done on Zoom, it's I'm sure it's still available, so I definitely have to watch it myself and everything. And there's, I believe, a petition as well. So I just wanted to just say about that. But back to you, Teo, is that, what I wanted to I don't want to go to your origin story just yet. I want to, because I'm really fascinated about the tours that you were doing, because you were doing one-man shows.
That's right.
And everything. And the one I am most familiar with is called Mr. Robeson, about Paul Robeson. And I was asking you, what was it about? And you were saying pretty much it was about his life. And how did you encapsulate all of that in your one-man play?
Yeah, Paul Robeson was an African-American who was born in 1898 and ended up becoming probably the most famous American of his time. Black or otherwise, as an actor, singer, and internationalist and activist. He was, I believe, as famous as even Martin Luther King would become about 30 years before.
Right.
And popular all over the world. He lived in England for about 12 years in the 1920s and 30s. And there's not a major city in England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales that he didn't visit and fill out a huge arena. But his story has been buried largely because for somebody so famous to also be such an activist and pro-socialist and pro-communist, he became seen as particularly dangerous to the status quo in the United States and actually around the world. So even as far as England is concerned, he was one of the foremost campaigners against colonialism and called for the liberation and independence of all the colonies.
Hmm.
When somebody like that, with such a huge following internationally, is speaking so eloquently about those things, he's regarded as dangerous. And so the United States government particularly went all out to silence him and largely succeeded.
Hmm.
And so when I happened on his story, it just seemed to me that my growing up, my interest as a singer and an actor, it just seemed to me that my life so thus far had been preparing me to tell this story,
Yeah.
which I have been doing since 2009.
Yeah. I mean, you also said, I mean, like, that was your unique selling point as well, that you could sing as well as, deliver, I guess these lines and everything with such power. And I'm just curious about the international, because you toured this nationally and internationally. And I
That's
asked you,
right.
like, where did you travel? I mean, and you've been to the States.
That's right.
You've been to Canada, but also too is I mean, you said to me, I'm a Nigerian,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So I want to know, how did it feel as a Nigerian to go back home with this particular story?
It's it's wonderful actually. Um, I had been I hadn't been performing it that long when I first took it to Nigeria.
Hmm.
Ironically, the first time I performed it in Nigeria, I was invited there, taken there by the United States Embassy to Nigeria.
Wow.
That's part of the State Department.
Yeah.
Now, the State Department in 1950 cancelled Paul Robeson's passport,
Whoa.
and he took them to court and fought them for 8 years before his passport was restored. His passport had been cancelled because he was causing so much embarrassment internationally. And so it was quite ironic that I was being invited to Lagos by the US Embassy to tell this story to Nigerians.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing was that Paul Robeson actually traced his ancestry to Nigeria,
Wow.
to the Igbo people.
Hmm.
I'm Yoruba, uh, and he, when I discovered him, I mean the very powerful effect that he had on me was that this American who had been dead some 25 years
Yeah.
before I had even discovered him taught me to be proud to be African and to be proud in an African history.
Yeah.
And I just thought that his particular story, with all the trials and tribulations he went through for being so socialist, would teach, as you know, many people about modern history.
Yeah.
His father had been born into slavery, for instance, but his father had taught all his children African history and pride in Africa.
Yeah.
And here am I, Nigerian in England with university education, didn't know as much African history as perhaps he had.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that this is a story that had to be shared. It could do a lot for not just for Africans, but for people all over the world.
I sometimes I call myself, yeah, those dumb Americans. Because we don't have Black history in schools, and we don't even have Black history in school here.
That's right.
But I didn't know that what you're saying about Paul Robeson.
Well, there you go.
And I encourage people, to, always educate themselves. This is another reason probably why you have done this particular show for so many years.
That's right. It's
Ye-
been 12 years now
Wow.
and counting.
So, but then he's not the only gentleman that you decided to explore,
Mm.
because you also did another one man show called Just an Ordinary Lawyer.
That's right.
And now, what I found interesting about this personally is like, you said he was Britain's first black judge.
That's correct. A
right?
part-time judge, but a judge nonetheless.
Yeah, a circuit court judge,
Yes,
whose name was Tunji Sawande.
that's right.
But I know, and I'm sure we all know, hopefully we do, is that he's the uncle of Femi Sawande, who is another one of our local people here in Liverpool
That's
and
right.
everything, and a good friend of mine. So I was like, what?
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
he's the one who gave you the story,
that's
the
right.
pitch of the story.
Yes, and it just happened because, uh, Femi I've known for many, many
Yeah,
years, and he knew I was a singer, and he always used to tell me, "Oh, I have an uncle that sings."
yeah,
Uh, and then it became I had an uncle that sang because he died.
yeah.
And eventually, actually, Femi gave me his late uncle's sheet music collection.
Wow.
And there was a time in London when I was performing called Mr. Robeson. There was a Nigerian in the audience who asked me afterwards, "Have you heard of Tunji Shawande?" I said, "As a matter of fact, I have." And he said, "If you go onto Wikipedia and look up his name, anything that's written about him, I wrote because I'm a Nigerian historian.
Wow.
I look up interesting Nigerians, and I think he will be an interesting subject for a play."
Wow.
So I looked him up. It was interesting, but compared to Paul Robeson, not
Mm.
really that interesting. Okay, he was the first black judge in the country.
Yeah.
He loved cricket, that was clear. Um, he sang, but how do you make a story out of that?
Hmm.
Um, but Liverpool Everyman and Playhouse asked me to submit some ideas for full-length plays for a bursary, and this was in a list of ideas, and that was the one they picked. They said this looks interesting,
Yeah.
and I thought, oh my goodness, what I'm going to do. But then in my research, following
Mm.
the cricket angle, it turned out he was a member of the MCC.
Can you just say what that is?
The MCC is the Marylebone Cricket Club, which
Okay.
is the club in London, which is like the pinnacle of cricket.
Oh.
Very, very prestigious. And it
Yeah.
is the MCC committee that chooses the England side.
Is it?
And you don't just enter that club. You're in the waiting list for 30 years or something. So how
Right.
did this guy get into it? So I asked around, but one interesting response I got was from a bookseller here in Liverpool called Tony Aitman, who said, "I don't know the answer to how many black people there were in the MCC, but I have a book about Basil d'Oliveira,
Hmm.
which I borrowed and read, and I thought that's the key to this play."
That's how you break it.
That's right. Now, Basil d'Oliveira was born, he was what they call colored in South Africa. So that is mixed race, uh, multi-heritage, basically not white. And his ancestry was Southeast Asian.
Right.
But he was a cricket genius. But in apartheid South Africa, he was not permitted to play first-class cricket. So he ended up in England in 1968, I think, and within 3 years was playing for England. And then the time came for England to play South Africa in
Mm.
South Africa, and Basil d'Oliveira should have been in the team, was not selected because of pressure from apartheid South Africa, and that caused a riot all over the country.
No.
And in fact started the international sporting boycott of South Africa.
Hmm.
So the play basically starts with my character Tunji Showande watching the crucial match that would result in D'Oliveira being selected,
I
and
love
then
that.
and then using that combination of sport and politics to look at black liberation struggles around the world with sports as a central theme.
What period was this? Like the 60s or the?
Yes, the match that he played, the test match that he played against Australia that he should have been selected from was 1969, and the test match, England test tour to South Africa would have been 1970. So there was formed something called the Stop the 70 tour, led by a man called Peter Hain.
Hmm.
And yeah, so my character is observing all this and then going back to African liberation struggles,
Yeah.
and then and he talks about the Angolan colonies fighting for liberation, Nigeria, of course, and what caused the civil war in Nigeria,
Mm.
and then goes to the United States and the Olympics in 1968,
Right.
where the Black Power salute happened.
Oh yeah.
Why did that happen? The whole background to that. So my character was a useful instrument, a useful channel through which to examine all these issues while singing and talking about cricket.
Yeah. No, I mean no, I mean again, I mean it's interesting and amazing because also too is I mean like especially in the 60s, you had for Americans you had football, and you had like, the rise of like people like Jim Brown and Fred Williamson and all that. So the whole sports thing,
Yeah,
seems to be a really interesting thing for that time period,
that's right.
to
And
focus
Jackie
in on.
Robinson is another
Well,
great example. Yeah.
you know what I mean. Anyway,
Yeah.
you know, so let's hit the origin story because like um, you were telling me how you came here to Liverpool in '89,
Hmm.
but you were an architect and everything, but you were an architect until like 2009,
That's right.
where I think you may have taken this up full time, but
Hmm.
we all hit a bump in the road, don't we?
Mm.
Whether something we do or something that's done to us,
Hmm.
and so you said you were open to talking about this bump that you had that happened to you.
Yeah, okay. So 1989, I came here to finish my architectural studies at Liverpool University.
Mhm.
Um, Qualified in 1991, and then set up on my own in 93, I think. Went into partnership in 94, and sadly, my partner died about 2 years later,
Oh, sorry.
and I carried on my own and tried to be a developer. But it didn't work out for a number of reasons. One of which was the recession. The other was that what I was trying to build was, I guess the city wasn't ready for it, which was basically a showcase development of eco-friendly green flats,
Oh.
which it's expensive, the council could have supported financially, and they they took a long time to say yes,
Mm.
by which time I had borrowed so much that I couldn't survive. And at the same time, my play was beginning to show some promise. And after I had performed it in Nigeria, and my father had seen it and finally
Mm.
understood what I was all about,
Oh wow.
said to me, if this is what you want to do, you got my blessing. And so when I came back and the new year came and I had to pay my subscriptions to the Royal Institute of British Architects and professional indemnity insurance, and I didn't have the money, I said, well, I'll just give it up and start acting.
Hmm.
So fast forward, you know, after touring internationally, I was back in Liverpool and I had another idea for a development project, and I approached the city council, who gave me an option on a piece of land to develop multi-generational housing, because I was concerned, like everybody is, at how isolated elderly people can be.
Wow.
And I thought, let's design something where elderly people can live surrounded by younger people, either of their family or other
Yeah.
families, in a more communal type of way. And yes, I got the option and had 3 years to get planning permission, finance, and all sorts of things together. Um, I ran out of time, basically. But in the middle of that, um, I asked for an extension of time because the company that I had set up was called a community interest company. And when I got a commercial developer interested in partnering with me, they said, we don't like this community interest thing. So I approached the council to say, can you let me change this to a limited company? And they
Mm.
just never responded
Mm.
until I ran out of time. And
Time seems to be the enemy here.
that's right. Well, not just time, but
Well, being nice there, Tayo. Come on.
not just time, but vested interests, shall I say, because it seemed that they decided in the council at one point that they wanted somebody else to develop the site. And so I lost it after spending thousands of pounds on it.
Can I just say, I did not expect this story because I like to have something surprise me. But eco-friendly flats, multi-generational housing. How is that not as good as what tall student towers that we have all over the place? Do you know what I mean?
Which are empty.
Which are empty.
Mm.
There's also, towers like down that are empty as well. But the point is, oh man, I did not. I'm hoping people are listening.
Yeah.
Look at my face. Oh, jeez. Anyway, let's go to something positive, shall we?
Yeah.
Shamed of that happened.
Yeah. But the fight goes
Not
on.
shame on you, shame on Shane.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this new project that you are working on, which sounds fascinating. You want to you've written a poem by yeah.
Yes. It started with when COVID hit the world and the reactions of the governments here and the United States particularly, which I describe as blundering.
Yeah, you can.
Yes.
I'm not offended at all.
At the same time, you had the British Prime Minister saying at this time the kind of things he had been saying for years, which basically boils down to whatever happens in the world, we, the great British, our empire is all powerful and great. And as I was listening to all this and seeing all the catastrophe building up, a line just came to my head. The empire has no clothes. Which, some people will be familiar with. The emperor has no
yeah,
clothes.
of course. Yeah.
And so that line basically eventually became a poem which I called Greatness in a Time of COVID.
Right.
I wrote it, read it to camera, and put it on YouTube. And after a while, I thought, actually, because of what the poem says, it goes through the history of colonization and enslavement, and the fact that many of the people, if not most, that die as essential workers are descendants of those very peoples that had been colonized and enslaved. So it's like a history lesson as well as a tribute to essential workers. And then the idea came to me that it would be good to have other people from around the world reading it in other colonizer languages, or in fact their traditional languages. And I would put these recordings on a map of the world and show where our peoples are and where they have come from. And so I have, it's becoming a project it's growing. I have recordings from as diverse as the Democratic Republic of Congo, somebody reading in French, to California, a great Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who translated it and read it in Gikuyu. And I have people obviously here in the UK and other parts of the United States. So it's something that is growing, and I'm hoping will just spread around the world.
Yeah. I mean, now that sounds like a pandemic we like to spread.
Exactly.
Right. So for people who want to get involved, I mean, like, do you have a website or a Facebook or?
Yes, the project is titled Mapping Greatness.
Whoa!
Mapping
That
Greatness.
is awesome.
Because the title of the poem was Greatness in a Time of COVID. So mappinggreatness.com is the website.
Very easy to remember.
That's right. And on that website, you see my recording of the poem. You see the poem itself and other people's recordings and my email address and so on.
So, is there a Facebook page or anything like that?
Yes, there is also a Facebook page, Mapping Greatness.
Mapping Greatness, easy to
That's right.
find. I love
Yeah.
it. I love it how, you should have a Twitter. Twitter, Instagram, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Get down what the kids did,
Well,
Theo.
interesting thing is that I have 3 or 4 Twitter pages, and I thought Twitter accounts and Facebook pages. But I thought, I'm just going to put certainly on Facebook, Mr. Tayo. Sorry, on Twitter, Mr. Tayo Aluko is going to be encompass all my projects because
Yeah.
I'm getting a bit fed up with all those pages.
Yeah, I know. You only just need one name for everybody to find you. But,
Mm.
seeing that we're coming down to the end, I just would, first of all, I mean, I love your voice. I would like, it's only like 2 minutes, if you won't mind, if you want to, share it with us.
Okay. Yes. Do I do it to camera?
Yeah, man. I mean, if you can.
Okay.
That's your
All
camera
right.
over there.
Yes. Mapping greatness. We made our homes in the belly of the beast that devoured our ancestors and spat them out on the other side of the globe, that stole our gold and rubber, our skills and knowledge, our art and music, our history. It gorged and fattened itself, dressed in unmissable finery, and declared itself proudly the empire. It saw its greatness in our puzzled eyes as we stared up the barrel of a gun from every corner of the earth. Its guns were needed still, we were told, to protect us from the socialists and the communists. Capitalism, our enslaver for centuries, would liberate us one day. It bought our rulers and continued the quiet theft of our humanity and our dignity as it planted poison and bombs where once there was rice and diamonds. And then the virus came, silent, swift, and deadly. We answered the call to the front line to confront this invisible enemy. We asked simply for gloves, masks, visors, and gowns. As we fell one by one, we finally began to see that what the gentle ones had been whispering loudly had been true all along. We'd been feeding on the beast's excrement, unmindful of the fact that the empire has no clothes.
My man, I'm I'm deeply moved and flabbergasted.
Thank you.
I also love the fact that you want people from around the world, for those who are watching, to actually, all you had to do, just create your own version of that poem in your own language or in your parlance, because it is about a shared humanity.
That's right.
I love the idea of the world map,
Yes,
as well as I love it when you said our history,
correct.
because we've always been a debate, me and James Bow and everything, about Black history, African history. How about our history?
Exactly.
Because if as long as we continue to divide ourselves as people, we will always be separate.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm good. But either way, it's been a fascinating conversation with you there, Teo. And again, mappinggreatness.com. You can find it on the different social platforms. Please follow my man Teo. Please also continue watching Blackfest and the moderation of the interview that you had done last night. So you can see this in your own time because it was done on Zoom. And I would once again like to thank Tayo Oluko for joining me. I'm Chase Johnson Lynch. You've been watching a community podcast here at Big Condo Radio. Don't forget to like and subscribe, especially off of this one because it's amazing and everything. And join us next time where we'll have another fascinating tale to share with you about someone else who may be you in your community. Thank you.